This is Rugby Unity. I am David Pembroke, and joining me in the studio, a real pleasure for Rugby Unity listeners around the world, is one of our great referees, Angus Gardner. Welcome to the studio and welcome to Canberra.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me. Great to be here and great to be on the podcast today.
So, you're okay? You had a bit of a knock last week in the Chiefs Highlanders game. Everything's okay?
Yeah, got poleaxed last week. It's probably fair to say. I'd actually copped the knock 2 weeks earlier in a Six Nations game between France and Scotland. Charles Olivon kind of ran into the back of me.
Okay.
And then, as luck would have it, Hugh Renton got me in exactly the same spot. So, but this time he floored me, and I actually thought my arm was disconnected from the body. So I thought it was pretty serious when the paramedic offered me the green whistle. So I said, no, I'll stick with my own whistle. I won't go the green whistle and be medicabbed off. So, yeah.
Do you think about the risks of refereeing, or is it something that, it's an occupational hazard?
Yeah, occupational hazard, and got to be good enough to get out of the way, really. So that's on me.
Okay. All right, listen, before we get into, a longer conversation about refereeing and your career as such, what's the Angus Gardner story? Where does it begin?
Yeah, so it begins at age 15. Played rugby as a kid. Played for Lane Cove, which was my junior club.
In Sydney?
In Sydney.
Yep. What position did you play?
I played halfback.
Okay.
So I loved the game. I was passionate about rugby. I remember the 91 World Cup final. My old man got me up at 2 a.m. in the morning to watch the Wallabies beat England at Twickenham. And I think that kick-started the passion for me for the game.
Okay.
It was amazing. And then at age 15, got diagnosed with Sherman's disease, which is like a hereditary back condition. So my discs didn't properly develop, kind of going through development puberty, and couldn't take impact at tackles and got injured as a result.
So could you grow?
I could grow.
You were growing, but it was...
Just the discs weren't growing. So
Okay.
the impact that my disc could take were at risk from playing rugby.
So what, you got injured, like you kept playing, but but you kept getting injured.
Kept getting injured, kept getting back spasms, but we didn't know why. And then eventually, around kind of 15, we ended up going for an MRI and then got diagnosed with Sherman's disease.
All right. And how is that now? Do you grow through Sherman's disease?
You do grow through Sherman's disease. My back's always been there or thereabouts. It's something I've got to manage, especially with all the travel. But it's something that I've been able to manage for the best part of my career.
Okay.
Look, in 2019, at the end of the World Cup in Japan, I ended up having back surgery in 2020 just to remove a disc in that area or a bulging disc in that area. So, yeah, it has been a bit of an issue over the years.
When was the decision about refereeing? Was there somebody who pulled you aside and said, look, you love the game, we need referees, maybe you might like to go down that path? Yeah,
absolutely. Like I went to Shaw and the sports master there, Andy Cavill, basically pulled me aside and said, look, I heard you can't play rugby anymore. We've got a great refereeing program. Would you be interested? And I'll sign that off as your winter sport.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh, look, I don't know if I'm that keen. I was happy to give it a trial. Gave it a trial. Absolutely hated it.
Oh, did you?
Hated the parents on the sideline yelling at me. Hated reffing my mates. But I stuck with it.
And when did you start to like it?
When I left school, New South Wales Rugby approached me and said, look, we're looking for guys that had been schoolboy referees, gone through the referee program. Would you be interested in coming and reffing senior footy? So I said, yeah, look, I'm at uni. I'll give it a go on a Saturday. And that's where I found my passion, refereeing sub-districts in Sydney. I just loved the fact that the players were playing subbies because they loved the game. I loved the game. And refereeing was a way to give back to the game and help them to enjoy what their passion was. And I loved the fact that they had the respect for referees. They'd ask you back for a beer at the clubhouse. They'd make you feel welcome. And that's where I really found my passion for it.
And when did you think, or when did it start to come upon you that this could possibly be an elite career?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess in those early days, I never really thought about it as being a professional career. I was studying at university. I did a property economics degree at UTS. and I was actually working in project management at the time. I went and worked for Charter Hall, who obviously are great supporters of rugby in Australia, having sponsored the Shoot Shield for many years. And I was starting to kind of work my way up the refereeing ranks. I was starting to do some Shoot Shield, and then I was starting to then run touch at Super Rugby as an assistant referee. And Charter Hall was super supportive of that, and it just kind of became an inflection point where I was starting to do more travel every weekend for Super Rugby, and it was looking like I was going to get a crack at at Super.
And was
Rugby.
there a decision point? Did you go to your boss at Charter Hall and say, "Hey, I actually am going to have to do this full time now. I've been offered the opportunity to be a full time referee"? Is that what happened?
Yeah, pretty much. It was looking that way, and Charter Hall kind of, said to me, "Look, we kind of really want to support you with your property development career, but we can't do both now." And so I made the decision at that point that I didn't want to regret not giving refereeing the best shot I could. So I ended up kind of resigning from Charter Hall and parting ways on very kind of good terms, amicable terms. And then I ended up going back to Shaw and helping them with their building program. They had a master plan that they wanted to roll out, and so they they'd heard that I was kind of looking around and looking for a more balance in terms of refereeing and applying my trade, so to speak. So they offered me a role, and then I got selected as an assistant at the 2015 World Cup, and then Rugby Australia offered me a full-time contract in 2016.
Well, you've made a fair career of it since then, gone on to become one of our great referees. And it's interesting, isn't it, that refereeing in rugby is just so important. I was talking with Alan Gilpin last week, the CEO of World Rugby, and he rolled out the statistics that our referees are called upon to make something like 800 decisions in a game. It's complex. What's your approach to it? How do you think about managing an elite game of rugby?
Well, look, I think, like for me, David, it starts with the mindset about what you're there to actually do. And I think that's critical. Like that kind of becomes the foundation for me. Like I'm there to service the game and the players. It's not about me. It's about the two teams and them being able to show their abilities and kind of talents. And so I guess I kind of see myself as an enabler of that. And so it starts with that kind of foundational mindset for me, that it's very much an act of service back to the game. And so then, like, I guess to try and then simplify the game into the key parts and just have only one or two key things that we're focusing on at each point in the game, and really trying to segment up the match, whether it be scrum, line out, breakdown, foul play review, injury downtime. We get very we have to break it up because, as you say, it's just so complex.
So who decides those focus areas? Well, how does that all work? Because I think people watch it sometimes and it's hard to understand a little bit. It gets away from people sometimes due to the complexity.
Yeah. So if I split the kind of the two, the two competitions within the game, you've obviously got World Rugby and then Super Rugby.
Right.
So each of those, competitions have their own kind of shape of the game committees, and each of them have their own set of referee management. And so within each of those competitions, we kind of agree what we call is a critical few. So we call our approach to each area of the game the critical few. What's the critical few things that if we look after this, for an example, at the breakdown, the number one focus for us at each breakdown is making sure the tackler is out of the runway, out of that back area of the breakdown space. So that's one of the critical fews that we align on. We then engage coaches and teams to make sure that the critical few that we've signed off for each of the key phases, they think they can coach to and then they can buy into. So it's a bit of a kind of a dual responsibility that we're actually kind of creating this critical few document, but also making sure the teams buy into it so that then when we actually do referee, we are aligned.
So they're clear. They know what the critical few
Absolutely.
Are in every contest, whether it be at international level or Super Rugby level. They're clear, you're clear, And then from there, obviously, the game takes place.
Yeah, and then it's the interpretation at the moment.
So that's the next point really, is around interpretation. Yeah. How does that work?
Yeah, so I mean, hopefully because we've got this critical few document, the interpretation is less interpretation and more that's what we've agreed. Obviously, there's grey areas in the game, and I guess one of the great things about rugby and the way in which we can interact with teams and coaches and countries and various parts of the game, we actually regularly review the grey areas. So if something becomes a grey area in the game, that gets put up. So, for example, line-out setup's been a focus this year, making sure that we've got people in the right places. Over probably the last few seasons, it had become a bit of a grey area about where people needed to stand. Were we kind of being robust enough in making sure that was being refereed properly? So that we've then gone back to the teams to try and get that sorted for this season.
And so these resolutions of these types of issues, is it happening on a weekly basis that you're then saying, okay, that's something that we're going to all have to look at this week, line-up setups?
Well, we do that at the start of the year. So
Right.
we do a season review. So we try and get the critical few document laid down at the start of the year. We try and get as many of the grey areas resolved at the start of the season so that then everyone has the clarity going into the season.
But what about as the season rolls through and we find coaches finding other ways of getting around, the constraints because they're looking for an advantage? Are you rolling through the year trying to update, adjust? And if it's not just the referees, who else is advising you around, how the game should be refereed?
Yeah, look, you're absolutely right. So each week as a referee, we do our own review.
Yep.
And that review actually gets sent to both teams. So we're fully transparent and accountable with our performance. And within that review, we would pick up any trends from the teams and we would feed that back to them. So, for example, one of the trends might be, just as an example, hey, at the crossfield kick, your winger's not staying fully onside. Please make sure that he just holds back another few seconds before he goes to chase the ball. So that might be a piece of feedback that gets fed back to the teams. Any trends that go across the competition would get picked up by our referee management group, and they would then get disseminated out towards the teams as a kind of collective to ensure that we're managing the competition week to week.
So who's on the referee management group? And is it the same at World Rugby level as it is at Super level?
No, different. So at Super Rugby level, our management group consists of Brendan McKibben, who ex-Waratahs players, now the referee manager at Rugby Australia, and Matt Goddard, who was an ex-Super Rugby referee in his time and Test referee. And then on the other side of the ditch in New Zealand, we've got Chris Pollock, who again was a former Test referee, and Mike Fraser, who again was a Super Rugby referee in his own right. So those four are the referee management group at Super Rugby, and they're responsible for reviewing our performance in conjunction, with each referee and each referee team, and then also being across managing the teams, coaches and trends as that goes forward.
That, to me, sounds like really useful information, relevant information. Is there any reason why fans wouldn't be able to see that information, to understand how the game's evolving and changing?
That's a great question. Like we should definitely make that available to fans. I think the more transparent we are around our game, the better, and because I think that just leads to a greater level of understanding.
Well, because I didn't realise that was available, if there's no reason why it couldn't be shared. I think it's one of the issues I was discussing again with Alan Gilpin around this whole notion of transparency about the game, because I think it will help to grow the appeal of the game. The more people understand, the more the more people will be able to draw to the game, because ultimately we do need more people in more countries caring more about the game, because it is a spectacular game when played well.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's various things. I mean, at the World Rugby level, they do a program with Nigel Owens following each round of international appointments, where he explains the big decisions or the key moments from each of those test matches. So I think that's probably just the tip of the iceberg in terms of us being more transparent.
Do you feel some sort of responsibility around, the contest, the spectacle? Does that enter into your mind when you're controlling a game, or is it that depends on how the players behave that we then get a contest or a spectacle? But is there any sort of responsibility that you feel towards that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a referee, you're always there's always a tension point between accuracy and flow. You would have probably heard that in many circles around flow versus accuracy and that kind of balance in the spectrum. And I guess that's probably the art of refereeing, is how each referee balances the flow versus the accuracy part of the performance and the match. And there's several factors that go into that, like you say, how the teams present on the night, whether they want to be compliant or whether they want to push the edge. And then it's about us trying to be, our kind of three key principles are fairness, equity and flow. Or safety, fairness, equity and flow. So it's how we balance that is definitely forefront of mind.
Regular listeners to Rugby Unity will be aware that we often talk about the referees with Ewen McKenzie and Eddie Jones, obviously very interested. And whenever I ask them for a tip, they'll always say the first question is, well, who's the referee? They want to know because once they're aware of the referee, that then has an impact on the way they judge a contest. Are you aware that that's how important the referees are to experts like Ewan and Eddie?
Yeah, of course. I mean, as referees, we know that when we do a game, it's more than likely both teams have done a profile on the referee as part of their preparation. Certainly, I know that at the international level, all those teams will profile the referee that they have for that match, including, does he lend to rewarding attack, or is he more defence focused, or what are his traits? And I guess in our game, when we have so much statistical analysis presented to us, that information can become pretty readily available. So,
do you know how you've been profiled?
Oh, look, over the years, David, people have shared snippets, so it's quite fascinating, to be honest.
What are some of your qualities?
Well, I think one of the things that hopefully is part of the profile is more my balance around the communication piece and just letting both teams know where they're sitting during the game. And I think if we can, as referees, articulate what we're seeing to both teams and try to best manage that, then hopefully that influences the outcome.
Yeah, I'll come back to that notion of that's what I've seen, or that's what I saw, because I thought that was very effective, particularly in the last round of the Six Nations. I think some of the communication for the referees was outstanding because we had these brilliant games, and I do believe that the referees in each of those games, plus in the second last round as well, contributed enormously to the fact that we saw rugby almost at its best. But before I get to that, Mark Robinson, former CEO of New Zealand Rugby, soon to be joining World Rugby as head of rugby, is currently conducting a review around yellow cards, TMOs, to take to the council in the middle of the year. You're sitting in a room with Mark Robinson. What do you tell him? What does Angus Gardner think we need to do to continue to improve the adjudication, the refereeing of our game?
Oh, it's a great question. I think one of the perennial points that we always come back to is that tension between balance and flow. I think one of the things that Super Rugby has really tried to promote in its product is the flow piece. And I think, if we look at a lot of the innovations that Super Rugby has put in over the last two seasons, it's to create more opportunities for flow, playing on from minor injuries, kind of changing the 50-22 law this year. Obviously, the free kick, at the box kick if they join afterwards, free kick for the not straight. So we're actually looking for opportunities to get the game back up and operational rather than necessarily going to a scrum. And I know that might, for perhaps rugby purists, I know that might be at odds with how they see the game. But I think, one of the things that certainly we've been asked to as referees do at Super Rugby is really buy into the product of looking for reasons to keep the game going, looking for opportunities to award tries, and looking to reward game momentum. So I think for Super Rugby, it's a product, and teams and players and coaches and referees have kind of all brought into that product. I think the challenge at the international level is that because there's so many different countries involved at the World Rugby level, how do you achieve, greater perhaps alignment around the clarity and the tension between accuracy versus flow? So I think that's a real challenge at the international level.
We're not talking rugby, we're building it. Rugby Unity.
So one of Eddie Jones's suggestions is that there should be, like there is in cricket, an international squad of umpires in cricket, but in rugby it would be referees, where you would, say the top 20, worked for World Rugby, and then they're distributed around the world to do work. What do you think of that idea of having an elite squad at the centre of the game?
Yeah, look, I think we're kind of talking there about like a centrally contracted referee set. Yeah, look, I think it would have benefit, because I think World Rugby would then employ those referees and be able to kind of really influence the way in which we operated across a global calendar. Because I think that is one of the challenges at the moment. Like down south in Super Rugby, our competition only runs to kind of, from February to June, where we finish Super Rugby and then we go into a test match calendar. And depending on where you're scheduled over the test match calendar, you can have certain parts of the year where you're not actually refereeing week to week.
Yeah.
Whereas if you compared that to, say, the Northern Hemisphere, most of the guys in the Northern Hemisphere, their competitions run pretty much all year round. So the workload, we often say, for the Northern Hemisphere referees is higher than the Southern Hemisphere referees. So that would obviously be an option if World Rugby centrally contracted.
The yellow card, and this one's for Ewen McKenzie. It's his absolute. He is dedicated to trying to retain, the contest, the 15 on 15. Apart from foul play, obviously that needs to be dealt with separately, and it does have, and it can have, such a material impact on the game. Where do you sit with sort of the sanctions? And again, this is something that Mark Robinson's looking at in terms of the use of the yellow card, because for me, sometimes you sort of think, I understand why the referees put the guy off the field or the girl off the field for 10 minutes, but gee, that was harsh. Like Alice Genge, I think, against France the other day, I thought that was harsh. Off for 10 minutes, and then all of a sudden they've scored 2 tries and they got away, and it makes it difficult to, maintain that integrity of the contest for an infringement that, perhaps wasn't, well, I didn't think it was that bad. But what's your view about that, about retaining 15 on 15 and finding other sanctions other than the yellow card, which puts people off the field?
Yeah, look, I mean, if we start with the 20-minute red card, I think that has been a good innovation into the world of rugby, where we are actually trying to retain 15 on 15. The 20-minute red card, yes, you lose the player for the 20 minutes, but after the 20 minutes, another player comes back on to retain that 15 on 15. So, we often look at the yellow card, and I agree that that's critical, that 10-minute period. But when we lose a player for the entire game, obviously but for an act of thuggery, which I think the permanent red card needs to be there for, and
absolutely,
I think those instances are clear in the game, we are trying to retain the 15 on 15. I guess for the yellow card, what I would say is, we, again, like the critical few, we do have the buckets in which the yellow card sits. So we've obviously got the bucket for foul play, and obviously the head contact process has been a key part of our game. Then we've got the one-off cynical kind of action by a player, and then we've got the repeat infringement. So they're kind of our three buckets for the yellow card. And I guess, you'd like to think that the yellow card bucket for foul play should be pretty clear when that goes to video review. You'd hope that the repeat infringement is clear because the referees actually set that up with the team, given them a warning, given them an opportunity to change. And then if they don't, then the yellow card should follow. I guess probably perhaps what Ewan's referring to is more the cynical nature, that one-off deliberate action. And I think, that is just, again, part of the game that's open to interpretation. Each referee will read that situation or that moment depending on, where we are in the game, momentum, was it a line break, was that team under pressure? So there's a lot that kind of goes into that bucket as well. I think the yellow card is actually creates a lot of jeopardy in the game, to be honest. It's just my own personal view that when a team goes down a player, it creates, it does change the shape of the game.
It does.
And it changes the contest.
Yes.
So
but I think that's his argument, is that shouldn't, and there should be other sanctions. I'm speaking on his behalf, but he's not saying just let it go.
Yeah.
He's just saying find another way to deal with it, to leave, to keep the 15 on 15, because the quality of the athletes in both of the teams and the equality that we're starting to see, it is such a big penalty when it goes from 15 to 14, because the teams are a lot closer now, and it would seem getting even closer as the years go by.
Well, maybe I should grab Ewan for a coffee and we could perhaps feed it back into to the shape of the game committee. So,
no, well, I'm sure they all listen to the program. So, but the TMO is probably the last thing I just want to bring up with you. How do you think about the TMO? How do you work with the TMO? Because again, it's been a point of contention on rugby unity. Eddie Jones in particular, he's not a big fan of the TMO. Your views?
Well, I think, the TMO originally, if we go back to when it was first introduced, was really just around try scoring, wasn't
it?
Like, that's what it originally came in for. Let's get the try.
Yeah.
The critical scoring elements of our game, we need them right because that's integral to our game.
Yeah.
And then it kind of morphed into foul play and really providing a backup to the referee on the pitch. I think, if I talk about Super Rugby, the TMO has been reduced at Super Rugby. So the TMO now, yes, he's available for those try-scoring moments, which I think is absolutely critical. But at Super Rugby, he can only come in if he believes it's at yellow card threshold.
Yeah.
So that's different to World Rugby, because at World Rugby, the TMO can come in for a live penalty-only call. So at Super Rugby, if we miss a high tackle that's just a penalty, he has to stay away. So I think Super Rugby's obviously decided that we just want it for those big foul play moments, and we want to make sure that they're right. And if the referees miss something on the pitch, that's part of the game. We obviously try not to miss anything on the pitch, but just with the dynamics of the game and the way it goes on, it's not humanly possible to get everything.
That's
but
right.
I think at Super Rugby, there's certainly probably an element of understanding from teams, and I think obviously from broadcasters that we're not going to get everything, and the TMO will only come in for those kind of key moments. So I think to kind of answer your question, I think it has to be around what the competition decides is important for it in that moment in terms of the scope of the TMO. I know World Rugby are looking at that as part of the review. So where that lands will be interesting. But I guess what I can comment on is Super Rugby. It's kind of decided that the boundaries need to be clearer. And I think, with where we've got to this season and last season and the season before, I think, people are starting to kind of follow that framework.
But interestingly, though, in the game you refereed France-Scotland, I think it was the first French try, I'm pretty sure it was, you went to the TMO, but it was sort of almost like, just check it for me on the run. I've given the try. And there were, we didn't stop. We didn't have to go back through. You weren't standing there looking at it. It was almost like, I'm pretty sure that, I'm really sure that it's a try, but, just check it for me. And so we didn't have to stop, and it was like, yep, okay, done. It was all done and dusted pretty quickly.
Yeah. And look, that was probably just an opportunity I was looking to keep flow in the game. I decided that we didn't need to stop. I was working with a TMO, Brett Cronin, who I've worked with many, many times before, and I knew that I could err on the side of awarding that try and just get him to sweep that in the background without stopping the game. So they're probably those little opportunities that I refer to around the accuracy versus flow, where I think referees, we can help the flow of the game. Like, we don't always need to stop for the TMO. Same with the playing on from minor injuries. There's often situations where perhaps a player's down, he just needs to get a bit of strapping. We can play on from that, without compromising player safety. But it's just, how do we look for opportunities in the game to keep the game moving?
So for mine, the last 2 weekends of the Six Nations were outstanding. Does the game get better than that? I don't think so. They were just such great games across all of the games. Now, there was a moment here, a moment there, but it seemed to me that the referees really took control of the games, and communication was clear. There was less reliance on the TMO, and it really kept the game going. Did something happen leading into those last 2 weeks? Because it just seemed to me that the authority of the referee was just like, right, we're going to run this game. I'm going to take the responsibility and I'm going to deliver it. And when we had the referee act with such authority, we got these incredible contests over 2 weekends. Did anything happen? Or
I don't think anything happened.
No,
I think you're right. I think, to be honest, like, when the referee actually takes, to your point, that authority, it actually means that there's perhaps less TMO involvement. So, look, obviously each game is different and the contexts are always different. But no, nothing really changed in those last 2 weeks. I think. Yeah, so it's it's a really interesting observation that you make. I think they were spectacular games, and I think the attitude of the teams really enabled referees to take that authority.
Yeah, and on a number of occasions, I think it was Luke Pearce a couple of times, players obviously chipped him about some decision, and he said, that's not what I saw.
Yeah.
What I saw was this, let's get on with it. And again, it was like, okay, well, we're not going to stop and go to the TMO. Go to the TMO and go through all. It was just decision.
I'm backing my live judgment.
That's it. I'm going to get on with it. I think we really, that's at the core of the game, because players are going to make mistakes, referees are going to make mistakes. Technology is never going to solve every call on the game, and I think we do have to. And there was a moment for me, again, through the Six Nations, in the Italy-Ireland game, on the field itself, Louis Liner scored that try. Holly Davison said it was a try. Assistant referee said it was a try. But then they went back to the TMO. The angle then looked, oh, my God, that's gone miles forward, where in actual fact, during the flow of the game, the referees called it and said, okay, well, it wasn't, normal. It was a line ball, but she called the game. But anyway, they came back and Italy lost that opportunity and to me, that was a moment of, let's just go, like, if the referees called it and the assistant referees called it, let's just live with that and let's get on with it. And let's not rely on the technology, which is not fallible, not infallible, I should say. So anyway, that was another moment where I hope the game sees more that we get this referee much more at the centre of it, and let's stick with the person who's on the middle of the field, because you're there, you're closest to the action.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm interested, and I think often people are, about the life of a referee. What's it like?
Well, it's a juggle. I'll be honest. I've got 3 young children. And an amazing wife.
I was going to say.
An amazing wife that...
and a very understanding wife.
Yeah, and an amazing wife who allows me to do what I do. Look, it is a juggle, because the travel that we undertake in a year is astronomical.
Yeah.
I think last year I was 68 flights throughout the year and probably nearly half the year away from home. So it's a huge commitment. And I think probably what people don't necessarily realise is that if you think about, say, for Super Rugby, the Brumbies, for example, they have 6 home games, 7 home games a season where they don't have to travel.
Yeah.
Whereas as a referee, we're travelling every week. Unless I get, say, appointed to a Waratahs game at home, I'm getting on a plane every week. So, I think referees compared to teams, we actually don't have many home games. And so it means that we're on the road pretty much every week in, week out.
And how do you fill in your time? What do you do? Obviously, there's the professional side of it, where you're preparing for the games, doing your analysis, working with your teams about how you're going to adjudicate on the actual contest itself. But there's a lot of other time that's got to get filled in. So do you read books? Do you go to museums? Do you play cards? What do you do?
Well, like for me in a Super Rugby season, there's pretty limited downtime because Super Rugby's fairly it's a bit of a sprint Super Rugby. So we're just kind of game, fly home, then you're into review, training, preparation for the next week, balancing the family time.
I'm sure you got the kids.
Kids at home, homework, washing, all that type of stuff, domestic duties. So by the time that fits into a week, I'm finding myself already ready to go again.
Right.
The time where we get a little bit more time on the road is when we go to Six Nations for 2 weeks. Yeah. So, when I went up a couple of weeks back for Scotland and France and then on to Ireland and Scotland the next week, that's probably where you get a bit more time on the road.
Right.
But
what do you do? What do you do to fill in your time?
I actually enjoy the downtime. I enjoy the time to myself because obviously I don't have the kids. And so I just enjoy wandering the streets, going to coffee shops, catching up on a bit of reading, listening to some podcasts. I enjoy walking the various towns and cities that I'm in. So I just tend to take in the scenery when I'm there and really enjoy it for what it is.
And do you hang out with the other referees?
Yeah, we do. One of the challenges when we go up north, sometimes some of the Southern Hemisphere referees, is that we don't always travel with other Southern Hemisphere referees. So sometimes you can get to a venue and it's just yourself for the week because then the European guys will only come in on the Friday before the game. So, for example, the last trip I was on, I travelled up with Brett Cronin, the TMO, so he and I hung out for the week in Scotland, which was fantastic. And then the next week...
What did you do?
We went to Edinburgh Castle. We went down to a few of the coffee shops around the place. We caught up with Holly Davidson over there, the Scottish referee, and we just did bits and pieces. So that was really, really enjoyable.
Touristy stuff?
Yeah, touristy stuff. I mean, we've been to some of these venues before, so you do get through that. I mean, when we used to go to South Africa for Super Rugby many years ago, they were fantastic trips because you could then get out and see some animals and go on safari and do some, see some amazing things.
And so referees, how would you characterise this community of sort of elite referees and elite officials that have such responsibility for our game?
Well, look, it's to be honest, it's a bit of a brotherhood because, refereeing can be a lonely and tough space at times, and so you need the support of your colleagues, and you need people who understand what the environment's like, and it can be a pretty harsh environment at times, depending on how the game goes. If there's controversy, if you find yourself in difficult situations. So we're a pretty tight-knit group across the world. The guys know each other really well. We get together twice a year for camps, and then it's highly likely at some point throughout the year you're going to tour with one of the guys from around the world. So
girls now.
And girls, yeah, of course. Holly, who's doing amazing. And so you do become tight because you have those shared moments of highs and lows. Yeah. And most guys have families or have relationships and that empathy towards each other or that understanding around when you're away, it can be pretty hard on the home life.
Yeah. There's such great change. It's such a wonderful time for the game, isn't it? We get this next wonderful innovation from World Rugby and from the leading unions where we have the Nations Championship and the Nations Cup this year for the first time. I think it's going to be transformational for the sport. Your thoughts on it?
Very excited. I think, like you say, David, I think it's going to be an amazing kind of chapter for the game. And just seeing teams tour around, I mean, we're already starting to look at where we might be travelling to in July and August for the Nations, for the first leg of the Nations Championships. I think it's going to be amazing.
Yeah. I think on the weekends, I read out I don't have them to hand again, but the other day on the program, read through the first weekend. It starts in, there's Christchurch, and then there's Sydney and Cardiff, and then Johannesburg and Cordoba. It's going to be one of the where, as rugby fans, each game is going to mean something for this competition, the North versus the South. And then we roll up to that final weekend at the end of the year where we have 3 double headers in London. Like, come on.
It's going to be amazing. It's going to be amazing.
It will be great. So congratulations again to everyone who sort of got in behind that. So that's good. But then 2027 here in Australia, where we are, both you and I, fortunate enough to live in this great country, and the Rugby World Cup will be here in 2027. Your feelings about that as an Australian, as an elite referee, having had the opportunity to be at 2015, 2019, 2023, this will be your fourth?
Yeah. Oh, look, I mean, obviously I've got to get selected first, so that's the immediate kind of goal, and then pending selection, obviously would be very proud to host referee colleagues at a home World Cup. I don't think there's anything more special than having a referee on home soil, and I think Australia is going to be incredible. I think the venues are amazing. I think the way in which the rugby community will get around it, and the people, the travelling tourists, I think it's going to be absolutely. And I
fantastic. Think the Australian community, we saw it in 2003, didn't we? That was just such a spectacular time here in Australia, and it will be a great occasion. As a referee, do you sort of, when you see, for example, the first tranche of tickets sold, 750,000 tickets already gone, 135 countries people have bought the tickets from. As a referee, do you look at that? Do you get excited by stories like that?
Yeah, look, I think for the listeners and the viewers, I think every referee has the goal of going to a World Cup. That's the pinnacle for us. So that's 4 years worth of work for most guys. That's 4 years worth of sacrifice at home, physical sacrifice in terms of your training and your commitment, travel around the world, and then trying to prepare each game, as important as the next one. To put yourself in a shot to be selected. So, it's a competitive bunch. Everyone wants to be there, and definitely the World Cup is the pinnacle for referees.
And so for you, for your career, how do you think about your career? Do you think year to year? Do you think 4-year cycles? How do you think about it? And obviously you're closer to the end than you are to the beginning, but is 2027 going to be it for you?
Look, never say never. I think... definitely we tend to look at a 4-year cycle. But I think for me, one of the things I've kind of learned, over my career is you do just have to focus on the next game, one game at a time. Because I think, probably like players and other people in the game, if you look too far ahead, you can get ahead of yourself. So I've very much learnt to just be one game at a time. The challenge for referees throughout the year is sometimes we bounce in and out of competitions, and that's why it's really important, I think, the one game at a time. For example, at the start of this year, I did 3 rounds of Super Rugby. Then I leave Super Rugby and go up and do 2 rounds of Six Nations and then come back to Super Rugby with slightly different law interpretations, slightly different critical few focus areas. And so I think you've really just got to, switch on and be game to game and make sure you're really connecting in.
And so when you do roll up, you'll be back into property, go and knock on Charter Hall's door again and say, hey, I'm back?
I don't know, David. I'm keeping my options open. If something opened up in rugby, I'd be thrilled to stay in the game if that opportunity opened up. And
What
it was
sort of thing? Like
right place at the right time.
In the refereeing side of the game, or doing something else?
Perhaps in the refereeing side of the game, or perhaps on the administration side of the game, or the competition side.
Okay.
I think having been in the game, at the level that I have been for such a long time, I'd like to think there was an opportunity to give back in a different capacity, using the experience and the wisdom that I've kind of accumulated over many years. So otherwise, could look at going back into property. So I haven't kind of decided what that might look like. Very much keeping the options open.
But it is an exciting time though for the game, isn't it? We have this Nations Championship, Nations Cup, World XV happening this year, World Cup next year. We roll into other competitions. We have the Olympic Games. We then have 2031 and 2033, 29. There is so much that's on, and it seems to me, at least anyway, that we're getting better organised, better structured, and the game is moving really nicely at the moment. There's good momentum behind it, and I think we're heading in the right direction. Yeah,
there's great excitement, great momentum. I totally agree. And I think even like you look at tomorrow night, like the Wallaroos are playing Fiji, at GIO Stadium, and then we've got Waratahs Brumbies straight after. So I just think those type of opportunities just create so much excitement for the game. It gives people an opportunity to experience the women's game, and then obviously the Super Rugby side as well. So I love when the game can align itself like that and we get those opportunities.
Well, Angus Gardner, thank you for coming in to the studio to spend some time with us. I'm very grateful that you have been able to make some time for us in your busy schedule. So thank you very much for joining us on Rugby Unity.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, David.
And to you, the audience, a big thank you once again for your continued support for the program. It continues to grow. And if you would like to sign up to the Big Three, you do have to jump across to Substack. That is the AI-generated Rugby Digest. It's you only need to go to one place now to find out everything that's going on in the media and everything that's going on in social media, brought to you into your email box once a week. It's a great product and it's free. So just to jump across to Rugby Unity Substack, you'll see that you can dial up there or sign up for the Big Three. And catch up on all of your rugby news. So very grateful to Angus Gardner for coming in once again, and grateful, as I say, for your continued presence in the Rugby Unity community. And we'll be back at the same time on Monday with our regular program with Eddie Jones and Ewen McKenzie. But until then, please, people, be kind to each other. My name is David Pembroke, and it's bye for now.